All right, y'all. We're gonna go ahead and kick it off. We are being recorded because a lot of people asked for it, so just bear that in mind with the questions you asked. I know we're an all-veteran group. Will came last year, and it was an absolutely phenomenal session. I still have notes from it. Former Wharton grad, Naval Academy guy, and then Marine veteran. So we're incredibly lucky to have him here. And with that,
hey guys, how's it going? Thanks for taking the time. If you didn't get the survey, it'll be up in a second. We're going to do a case study at the end where I'll show you kind of some tips and tricks about how I would go through buying a house. Enhance. Come on. What's your name? There we go. All right. That's me with shorter hair and one chin. This is me and my family. So you'll learn a couple things about real estate today. The basis, what I'll tell you is that location is really big. So I live up in New York City, or the New York City area. I live in Greenwich because New York City smells like poo. And Greenwich is great. I've got 2 kids. My wife's at Columbia Business School. I obviously live in Philadelphia. These are my daily images here, which I'm sure you guys see. So, just remember that. So I started from the bottom down here. I'm from the bottom of the country. I'm from Louisiana. I originally went to the Naval Academy Prep School, Naval Academy, Marine Corps. Started painter with another Marine and another Naval Academy grad. We realized we didn't know shit about the business world. So that's why I came to Wharton. And then I was an investment maker because I thought I could fill the sense of pride with money. And I can tell you that doesn't work out. So if you're going to go be an investment maker, God bless you. And then I founded Robertson Company because I have no creativity. So I just took Allen and Company, made it Robertson Company, and that's where we hold our real estate investments.
It's so funny.
Come on. Good to see the tech works. And then as part of that, so when I was graduating Wharton, I wanted to buy a house. And I couldn't get a lender to listen to me that hey, I've had a job in the Marine Corps. I've now been at Wharton. I want to go buy a house. Can I do that? And they were like, oh, you need 2 years of income and all this stuff. And I was like, you know what? That doesn't make sense to me. Why can't I use that? And so I started to found Veterans Alliance, which is a group of now 18 military veterans. We've become the #1 VA loan brokerage in the country. So we're nationally licensed in 48 states and the District of Columbia. You'll learn about what this means, but the willingness to manual underwrite, which means there's a way to automate stuff, and then there's a way to deep dive and actually give a shit about your customers. So that's what we've been able to do. And at the end of the day, we're a group of vets, and we want you guys to win. Specifically, I want you to win. So what is the VA loan? I want you guys to tell me what you know about the VA loan. Sean, you can go.
So it's just basically zero down, usually at the market or below the market interest rates, and then there's a cap depending on where you are as to how high the loan can go.
Come on, you came last year. There's no cap. No cap.
There's no cap?
No cap.
Entitlement.
Yes, okay. Sometimes there's entitlement. Anything else?
The more you use it, your fees go up, sort of having to pay the mortgage insurance and whatnot.
Never any mortgage insurance. Sometimes your fee goes up if you're not a disabled vet.
yeah, I was just gonna say that.
Anything else? One more. Come on.
Might be on the same page, but there's I believe you were talking about the funding fees.
Yeah.
The VA funding fee.
I think it's up to 4 units if you're living in one.
Correct. Yeah, good point. Yeah, so multifamily, you can buy anything from a condo to a multifamily. So here's some truths about the VA loan. There it is. All right, so the VA is not actually lending you money. So I'm lending you money. The VA is insuring me to lend that money. So what it does is it basically replaces your normal 25% down that you would normally put in a mortgage, and they're just insuring that. So it's a win for you. You're not bringing any down payment, and it's a win for me because we're lending 100% loan to value, and we have a giant government organization backing us in case of default. You can use your VA loan more than once. You can use it unlimited times. We'll do an example in a second where I'll show you how that calculation works. That's the only time a county loan limit comes into play. Otherwise, if you're approved and you find something that works, like a $4 million multifamily, you can do that. You can have more than one active VA loan at a time. You can technically have as many as you want. You can buy a condo, you can buy a co-op. There's a little intricacy there, but that's actually a new change as of this year. You can buy a fixer-upper. So there's something called a VA renovation loan, which is an awesome tool. You unlock basically an escrow account to pay for your renovation at a VA loan rate, which is insane. It's like I'm doing a renovation on my house right now. The VA rehab loan was not really a thing when I did it, so we had to self-fund. We use like construction loans and stuff. It's very messy, but the VA loan is awesome. You can use a down payment or earnest money. So
on that point before, the fixer-upper, what's considered a fixer-upper?
So the VA care, so you hear about like VA appraisals or VA inspections. There's no longer VA inspection, but the appraisal looks for safe, sound, and sanitary. So if the property fails safe, sound, and sanitary, then it requires rehabilitation. So if you need to finance that rehabilitation, that's where a VA renovation/rehab loan goes into. Additionally, you can elect to use a rehab loan if you want to renovate a bathroom, do a kitchen, anything non-structural. So you can't like expand a garage, like you couldn't build a garage with it, but you could add a dormer and like knock down some walls and like renovate a kitchen. So if you found a $500,000 house in, I don't know, Western PA, and you wanted to put $300,000 into it, as long as it appraises post money for $800,000, you can do that. And you get it at a VA loan rate, which is insane. On the down payment or earnest money front, so where I live up in Greenwich, people want to see 10% down. Now, normally that would mean that you would have to then finance 90% of it. But the cool thing is that the VA doesn't stipulate that if you place 10% down, that the borrower can't receive 10% at closing. So you can still finance 100% of the value, but meeting what you need to within the contract to make sellers feel comfortable and make it feel like you have skin in the game, which I always tell the joke. It's funny, like people want skin in the game. Well, when you were like deployed on a ship, they weren't bitching about your skin in the game then. Many items can be waived. So you can waive inspections, appraisal contingencies, finance contingencies. You can do whatever it takes to win the deal, and the VA loan will still adjust to it. So that's why I say, like, I say to the bottom, this is the only home loan that's earned. Don't ever let someone sway you from the VA loan. If they're swaying you from the VA loan, it's because either they suck at their jobs or they don't know what they're doing. Because it's, I mean, objectively, like we're all smart people, objectively is the best loan in this country, but bar none. It's awesome. And yeah, no size on which, whatever. So VA eligibility, if you're in this room, you're most likely eligible for the VA loan. You need 90 days of active duty, and that's how you get it. So the first thing that we would do when you call me is I would pull your certificate eligibility, make sure the VA actually knows that you are in the service. You'd be blown away how often that is not the case. And if there is a mistake, it takes basically like 20 days for them to fix it. So that's why we want to know, like today, even if you're closing in 60 days, that's going to be fine. Because what you don't want to do is call me, 30 days before you're closing, and we find out we have to get something adjusted on the certificate eligibility. So what is the certificate eligibility? This is it. So this is why I did Big Dog Chesty Puller's loan. So Big Dog was buying a house at 8th and I, $4 million place. He was charged $1 million in entitlement. So this is always normal. Entitlement is always 25% of the purchase price. And then the other thing that's normal is that no matter what, as long as you purchase more than a $144,000 house, your basic entitlement goes away. And that's because $144,000 is what every single veteran is guaranteed. No matter what their credit score is, anything like that, they're guaranteed a $144,000 house. Anything above that is called secondary entitlement. So that comes on to the lender's onus on whether or not they're willing to lend. So that's what I'm saying. If you're approved to $4 million, the VA is going to insure it. Now, whether or not you find a lender to actually do that comes on to you. Other things to look for here are like entitlement codes, but you guys don't really have to worry about that stuff. Basically, the takeaways are make sure this is right. Make sure that if you had a loan previously, that it's been taken off, stuff like that. Because all that stuff takes like 20 years. I own a house with a VA loan, can I buy another? So there's some math on here, I'm not going to bore you. Basically, it's your entitlement that we talked about before, and that number is subtracted from the current entitlement in the county that you're buying. So let's say you bought a $600,000 house in Virginia Beach, and now you want to buy a $1.5 million house in San Diego. So this shows you the math of how you do it. And basically it nets out that even though you used a shit ton of entitlement before to buy a $1.5 million house, you're only bringing $222,000 down. So you're bringing, what's that? Public math for Marine, not good. 15%. Like that's pretty awesome. Compared to a civilian who's going to bring like 25%. And because it's a VA loan, you're already like 0.5% less than the conventional mortgage market. Funding fees. So the short of this, if you have VA disability, or if you're active duty and you have a Purple Heart, you pay no funding fee. The long is, even if you don't have, and VA disability starts at 10%, by the way. And if, I don't know about you, but if you're in the military for more than a day and you don't have 10%, we need to talk. So anyway, the funding fee, if you don't have it, starts at 2.15%. So that's the fee that is charged by the VA to basically make this whole system work. So if you buy your second, it's 3.3%. So on your second purchase, you always basically want to use 5% down. Because by putting 5% in equity in your property, you're saving more than half on the funding fee, which is just a fee, right? Like none of us want to give the government money. Just remember 5% for subsequent use. All right, I'm a Henry. How do I buy with no cash? So I'm a high earner, not rich yet. All of us in this room, right? We don't have a ton of down payment money, but like you're about to go get a nice job at McKinsey, right? So the VA allows for a seller concession. So if you buy $1 million house, the VA technically allows up to 4%. So you could have $40,000 above your purchase price that the seller would give you. So you buy a $1 million house. Well, actually what you do is you bump the purchase price to $1,041,666. And then you choose what you want to do with it, right? So you can do a 3-2-1 buy down. What's a 3-2-1 buy down? So market rate today is like, I don't know, 6.75%. So 3-2-1 buy down means then the first year you pay 3.75%, second year 4.75%, third year 5.75%. If we've gotten 3 years in and you haven't been able to refinance off of 6.75, then like something's gone wrong. Because we just came off a peak. January 13th was the peak of the previous year, and market rate was like 6.8. So, and then the other thing is that you can add closing cost allowance. So how could you do a $1,073,000 purchase price if I told you there's a 4% limit? And it's because the VA allows us to distinguish between a closing cost and a rate buy down. So they're not the same. So you can allocate as much as you want towards closing costs as long as that 4% is allocated towards like actual loan costs. So if you want to pay down debt pre-existing to closing, right? Like if that debt is like a flat screen TV that you bought the day before you closed, that's fine, doesn't matter. Next thing is the rehab loan. We talked a little bit about it, but basically you can add money to a loan in order to do renovations to it. If anyone has any specific questions about that, we can talk ad nauseum. The takeaway for that is it does take a little longer because there's, depending on the price of the property, there's a HUD consult involved. So Housing Urban Development assigns a counselor to help you with the process, which is like having done a renovation, like that's a really cool thing. The government's not big and scary. There's actually things that really help you. And then you have to get a contractor bid and appraisal and some other stuff, so it takes a little bit. Normal closing timeline is like 30 days is the average. Within one standard deviation of that is like 21 to 60. And then within 2 would be like 15 to 90. And then 3 would be like 7 to 120. So you're adding a couple extra days in order to get this done. So the 4 pillars of a mortgage are credit, assets, income, employment, property value, and appraisal. So credit scores are credit scores. As long as you have above a 600, I said 620, I did say 600. As long as you have above 600, the VA considers you to be in like a top bucket. Now, if you have like close to 800, you're like top bucket, right? It's like really nice. We can lend all the way down to like 520. So the other thing I do the second we talk is I pull your credit, soft pull. And the reason that happens is, unfortunately, a lot of us had auto leases and we deployed, and auto dealers are notorious for not doing their job on credit reports. So there was a Green Beret in my wife's class. He deployed in September of 2020, returned his auto lease. Fast forward 4 years, he's talking about buying a house. I'm like, bro, your credit is fucking garbage. I know you went to West Point, but it's really bad. And so we look, and the auto dealership never returned his lease. So for 4 years, he had delinquent payments, or delinquent lease payments. So he calls the dealership. They, of course, are like, oh, my bad, sorry. It bounces back into the 700s, no issue, right? So like knowing that stuff in advance is really good. And then there's always credit repair people, which are very helpful, which I've started to kind of move into that world of like figuring out who's good and who's not. So if you fall into that, let me know. So I don't do a hard pull. Hard pulls are detrimental to your credit. So until I actually am ready to give you money, I'm not going to do a hard pull. And it never made sense to me when I was in your shoes. So I started the lending process as a borrower with Veterans United in February of 2022 when I was trying to buy in like summer of 22. And they pulled my credit every 30 days. And I watched my credit, I mean, I have good credit, but I watched my credit go from like, 800 something into the sevens. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? You were incentivized for me to have a low credit score. Like, why are you pulling my credit? So knowing that, we built this around not doing hard credit pulls. Some other things, these are just like free tips. You can get free weekly credit reports from annualcreditreport.com. It's a Federal Trade Commission website. Use it, because like you can check this stuff without me. Another one, register for the Do Not Call registry. This is like huge. If you get spam calls from people, go on this, sign up. If they call you and you're on that list, it's $4,000 that they get charged because of that. And then the third one is opt-out pre-screen. It's the CFPB. All of these websites look like sketchy and terrible, but they are government websites. The last one is opt-out pre-screen. Your credit is public information unless you ask it not to be. So you do that through opt-out pre-screen. So those are just plugs for government agencies. Assets are any liquid cash or cash equivalent. So even retirement accounts, we can assign like a 25% reduction and add that to your asset portfolio. The more assets you have, the more funky stuff that you can do. I closed a loan for a UCLA Anderson second-year guy who doesn't start his job until July, and I closed his loan in August. So if you're doing math, it's 11 months out from his job start date, which typically you hear it's like 30 to 60 days, but he had a shit ton of assets. So we were able to do some really flexible stuff. In that, if you need a gift to do closing money, or if you need a gift for closing costs, right? You're a Henry, you just haven't quite yet gotten it. You can get a gift from a friend, from your parents, anything, as long as there's no ownership. So they can't own a piece of the property, but they can give you money. And then if it needs to be a loan for tax purposes, so gifts above $18,000 are technically taxable, but there's nothing saying that they can't lend you something at like 1%. So just remember that. And then any cash needs to be seasoned. So what this means is if you have a bunch of money sitting in a coin locker right now, transfer it into your checking account before you talk to me for like 60 days. Because if we can't track the money, then it becomes an issue. And then I said you can use a loan if needed, as long as you account for it in your debt to income. Income and employment, that's why you came to school. So traditionally you need 2 years of employment history, but what we've been able to do is say, okay, you were in the military, you did cool stuff, then you came to Wharton, you learned a bunch of cool stuff, you did an internship, and now you're going to get a full-time job because you came to Wharton. So you were in a job training program, and now you're going to get that job. So as long as you have a full-time offer letter that has a start date, you can basically close 60 to 90 days out from that. And there's a lot of flexibility there depending on your individual profile. Self-employment, so Omar asked me about search fund stuff. If you're going to do a search or an ETA or something like that, set it up so that your C Corp or S Corp is paying you a salary, so you're a salaried employee of that company. Now there's some like financial hoops to jump through, but that kind of gives you that ability to have a W-2 salary so that you can buy a house. Otherwise, you do need 2 years of tax returns. Any disability, BAH, BAS, jump pay, flight pay, special hazard pay, anything like that, gets plussed up 25%. So if you make $4,000 on VA disability, it's actually $5,000 from a mortgage writing view, which is huge, $60,000 a year. And then if you have like that pre-existing house with a rental, you just need to show 2 years of tax returns with an audit, and then you need to have a reserve of 3 months. So property evaluation and appraisal, basically the takeaway from this is some states require termite inspections. They're the dark blue states. That freaks sellers out. So you're like, hey, I'm gonna look and make sure you don't have termites in your house. So what you can do there is do it for like information purposes only. If you're in like Connecticut, for instance, or Fairfield County around New York City, people get freaked out when you ask for an inspection. If you're like, oh, it's for informational purposes only. Okay, I don't know how that changes in their mind, but it does. You can do stuff like that. That's the only inspection that's required by the VA. The other thing is that if the appraisal comes in low, so the appraisal looks at your property value compared to previous sales in the area. If your appraisal comes in low, you can make up the difference with cash, which is cool. So if you find a house that you really want, but comes in low, you bring a little cash to close. There are some steps we can take before we get to that point. First one's Tidewater, which is where your real estate agent sends comparable properties to the appraiser, and the appraiser tries to find value. If that fails, the next one is where I get involved. It's called a reconsideration of value. So we go to the VA and we say, hey, this appraiser made a material, error. These are the errors we found. And it's like, this stuff happens all the time. They thought it was a townhome when it was a single family property. They miscounted bedrooms. They miscounted square foot. Stuff like that, right? A material error that caused this to come in low. So underwriting involves a lot of things. The first one is debt to income. The second one is residual income. Debt to income can flex, right? Debt to income is your income on the front end, like coming in, gross non-tax or taxable income coming in, divided by your housing payment. That can vary all the way up to 65% or even higher if you have some reason for it, which I'll talk about in the multifamily slide. The only thing that we can never get around, and the whole basis of the VA loan, is something called residual income. So the VA makes a determination of what, Lewis cost as a human to live. And if he's got kids and he's married and he lives in the Northeast, it's like $1,500. So you have to have that amount of money per month. None of you in this room, unless you are somehow going back and enlisting as an E2, are going to hit your residual income. You're all going to hit debt to income. So debt to income is broken into 2 parts. Front end is how you base your budget. So front end is just your principal and interest of your mortgage. So that's how you figure out what your actual purchase budget's going to be. Then the next step is you add taxes and insurance to it, and then the rest of your life. Auto payments, student loans, childcare expenses, stuff like that. So front end is how we'll figure out what your actual budget is. And then when you find 123 Main Street and you know it's $500 a month in HOA and $500 a month in taxes, that's how we get the back end. So if you have for some reason you need to go above the standard debt to income ratios, which for me is 65%, sometimes it's a little higher, that's when manual underwriting comes in. So that's when it gives me as the lender the ability to talk to the objective person that works behind closed doors for me that I never talk to. And I say, yeah, this guy's got a bunch of cash in reserves and he's buying a multifamily and he's a consultant and he's going to make another 50% on top of his income in December. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. So his debt to income is really not 75%, it's 35%, whatever it is. That's pretty cool. Student loans are not really a big deal. Lots of people have them, right? Basically, that's the formula to attribute student loans to your debt profile. Loans and leases can be excluded if you have less than 10 payments left, unless they're significant. So if you bought a Corvette Z06 when you were on deployment and you came back, that is significant. Your scooter is not significant. This is a huge one. So spousal debt is determined by communities' property laws. So in Pennsylvania, it's not a community property state. So you can be married, your spouse can be on everything with you. He or she can take title to the property, all this stuff, but we can exclude her from underwriting, him or her from underwriting. So what's pretty cool is you can assign debt to your spouse, relinquish your profile from having debt on it, and make yourself look like a much cleaner borrower, which is really cool. Where that actually plays out is like if your spouse went to medical school and has $300,000 of debt, we would take him or her off, just underwrite you, and you would have a very clean profile. Childcare can count towards debt to income. It always counts towards residual, because of course, like you gotta feed and clothe and send your kids to school. The way it looks, if it counts towards debt to income, is if you took a loan to send them to Deerfield Academy, then that counts towards debt to income. And then commuting cost. So if you're remote and you work for Strategy and in Philly, and you want to live up by me in Greenwich, that's totally good. But if you commute more than 54,000 miles a year in a car, then that's when it counts towards debt to income. So if you're spending like, what would that be, 150 miles a day in a car, then that's when it's like, probably it's going to cost you something. And then the other thing is remote work is totally fine. You just have to define how often you're in the office. This is what debt to income looks like. We'll talk about this in a second. So multiple buyer scenarios. So you came to Wharton, you met another man or woman here that you would like to buy a home with, but you're not married, right? Let's say it's another veteran. So each of you will get charged 50% entitlement, and you can't stack your entitlement. You're like, what does that actually mean? Don't ever combine your VA entitlement. It doesn't make sense. Because what happens is both of you become encumbered, so then neither one of you can go outside of the county loan limit. What you should do instead is one of you use your VA loan limit, and then you can probably qualify a loan, and then afterwards, after it's closed, you add that person to title. And let's say that you have a non-married co-borrower who's not a vet, so you would do that in case you needed to add your parents or a friend or something to bump your income up. That's fine, but you're only going to get half of your guarantee. So you're going to have to bring 12.5% down in order to do that. Which if you're a search fund person, again, you're probably going down that path where you're going to need some extra income in order to qualify for a house. So the primary basis of the VA loan is a single family residence occupied within 60 days of closing and intent to occupy for a year or more. So it must be the primary residence at the time of purchase. If 6 weeks in, you hate being an investment banker and you decide that you're going to leave and go start a crazy ass company with your friends, then that's fine. That's a valid change of circumstance. What is not a valid change of circumstance? You're a Naval Academy graduate and you get stationed in Virginia Beach and you buy a $150,000 house in like the ghetto. And then 4 weeks later, you're like, damn, I could rent this property for more than my mortgage payment. So then you buy another $150,000 house and you tell the underwriter that you feel unsafe, right? Which is a valid change of circumstance. Well, then you do it 2 more times, use the VA loan. And then just to really just swing it in, within the 1 year, you decide to buy a 5th house using the first-time home buyer's assistance loan. And the underwriter goes, wait a second, you have 5 houses that you've said you were unsafe in, and they're all within a 5-mile radius. And then, oh yeah, by the way, that was all with Wells Fargo, and the same underwriter did all 5, like the same person did all 5 loans. So that actually happened, and that person got a call on the deck of a US destroyer, and they were like, hey, you owe us $750,000 today, or we're foreclosing on your houses. So that dude was a friend of mine at the Naval Academy, and he called us, and we were like, you're an idiot. So we rolled the 4 into investment properties, and he did buy that 5th one with the FHA loan, and all was fine. But don't do that. If it passes your personal sniff test of like, am I full of shit? If you can't say like, no, I'm not, then don't do it. If you can, right? Like I had a valid change circumstance. I hated being an investment banker, and I'll tell you my example in a second of basically what not to do. We bought another house after it was all fine. I told you remote work needs an employer statement. All that says is Will can work remote 3 days a week. He has no change in salary or benefits from being outside of the hub of this business, and that's about it. And then this is a cool one. A property can have a single accessory commercial space or dwelling. So what does that look like? Is anyone a submariner? So in Charleston on King Street, you have retail shops on the ground, or you have a subway on the ground, and then like 1 to 3 units above it, right? Residential units. You can buy that entire building, which is a mixed-use commercial property. You can buy that with a VA loan. So you can buy a $3 million commercial property at 6.25% in Charleston, have Subway rent the ground floor from you, rent 2 other properties above it, and you live in one. So that's like an actual example of something that we did with the VA loan. It's pretty cool. Yeah, it's free bread for life. Free bread and smells. And Jared will come and try to diddle you. So you can buy a multifamily. So you can buy up to 4 units. 4 units includes that commercial property. So you don't go find some like 4 unit that also has a commercial property and then call me and like, it's just not gonna work. It has to be 4 units. On the commercial property front, before I forget, it cannot take up more than 25% of the square foot. So don't, last year, I'm constantly learning, right? Last year I gave the example if you found a warehouse in Los Angeles with an apartment, that you could do that. So of course, being, we're all MBAs, where we're like, oh, hell yeah. So someone goes and finds that, and we get into underwriting, and they're like, no way. Because it's like a 15,000 square foot warehouse with like a 500 square foot apartment. Like, they're like, no, this doesn't work. So it has to be 25%, and then it'll work. You must occupy one of the units as your primary residence, and you have to prove the likelihood of success as a landlord. So all that means is that you cannot have been in the Air Force. Cash reserves, you have to have 6 months of mortgage payments. So if it's a, let me think, easy math. Well, I actually give an example. If it's a $4 million place and just for easy math, your payment is $8,000, you have to have $194,000 of cash reserves in order to close on that property. You have to have a property manager in place at the time of closing. At the time of closing, you have to have a property manager. If on the next day you fire that person, I guess you're going to figure out how to be a property manager. If you have no rental history in the past, if you can show that you actually know how to manage a property, that's it. And that's pretty easy to do, by the way. And then you get to count 75% of the rental income towards your actual income. I'm going to send these slides out too, so you don't have to worry about taking photos. No paparazzi, please. So let's say that you're in Arlington, Virginia, and you find one townhome that's $1 million. And just for easy numbers, let's say this is what you look like, right? $250,000 salary, you have 70% DTI, or sorry, you have 70% VA disability, no debt, 7% APR just because it works out the math really easy, 1% taxes, 0.675 insurance, which are very high numbers, but I just want to make easy numbers so you can see how it works. So your first house that you buy is $8,000 a month. This is the one you live in. It's 35% debt to income. Let's say it's a row of 4, and you start doing the math, and you're like, I think this would 1-to-1 cash flow, right? I think it would rent for $8,000, and my mortgage payment's $8,000. Now, whether this is 8 or 9 or 17 or 5, whatever, the number does not matter as long as it's 1-to-1, right? So what you get to do is you get to count 75% of that towards your gross income, and then your DTI bumps up a little bit. And then it bumps up a little more, and you're like, ooh, I'm above 65. Will, can I do this? Yes. Yes, you can. Because in reality, you're not actually 69%. So I'm going to be able to explain that away through manual underwriting and be like, well, they're not actually 65 or 69. They're more like 50, or 35, right? They're gonna be like, okay, cool. 78, probably not gonna happen. That's like just too far outside the bounds. You're starting to stretch yourself pretty thin. But this example doesn't come across everywhere. I've tried to buy a $3.3 million triplex with 2 ADUs attached. So it was a 5-unit. It cash flowed $25,000 a month, and my mortgage payment was going to be $19,000 a month. Now, that's a big pill to swallow every month, but like, talk about setting yourself up for success. You have a $3.3 million asset that's earning you fucking $7,000 a month in cash, on top of, you know, every bit of principal that those tenants are paying off. So like, I'll show some calculations on the board. You know, people always ask like, oh, should I rent or should I buy? Well, I'll come back to that. Please don't let me forget, because that's a very interesting thing, and I don't think people really think through. And my advice is particular to you if you are using the VA loan, and even one step further if you're a disabled vet. If you're not those things, then this doesn't really apply. We'll talk about that. All right, so this is just that same debt to income calculator. I'm just showing the difference between single and multifamily. So you take your base income at the top, and then you add your little disability payment, and then your debt, right? Gives you your gross, and then you start spitting out like so. I'll send out an Excel sheet that it does this, but it starts to spit out like at different sensitivities, where do you find on this continuum? And what you should realize here is just basically if you're looking at the difference between a single family and multifamily, you have like 3.3 times buying power on the multi side. Multi is very, very property specific, because like you might find one like that triplex example I gave, which is awesome, right? Like what that means in real life is that you could actually qualify for like only $500,000, but you're able to buy a $3.3 million property because it's cash flowing so hard, right? But what it doesn't mean is if you find a $500,000 property and or a $1.5 million property, you're approved for $500,000, but it's not cash flow positive, you might not get approved for it. So it's very like property specific. I need to get my own clicker. All right, so this is a successful VA example. So this is my friend. He was my coxswain at the Naval Academy. He's now at HBS. When he bought his first house at Camp Lejeune, when he got there, he was a tanker. I was like, dude, you are insane. You're buying some piece of crap house in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Why would you ever want that? Well, he lived with 2 roommates, and he cash flowed $1,000 above his mortgage payment. So he was making $12,000 in his pocket for just owning a house. So he lived there, right, until he got out of the Marine Corps in 2020, dyed his hair blonde, bought a Lamborghini, or sorry, it's actually an Audi R8, and then drove across country and met me in California. That's a true story. And he put renters in it, and he's cash flowing $1,500 a month. They rented from him for 4 years. So then he gets out of the Marine Corps, does the military pathways program with JP Morgan. They send him to Dallas to teach him how to be a commercial banker. And he buys a townhome in Frisco, Texas. He's only there for like 6 weeks and then has a valid change of circumstance, which moves him to New York. So he sticks a renter in that property, and it cash flows $1,500 a month because Frisco is kind of a booming area of Dallas. So then he moves from Dallas to New York. He calls me, he buys another triplex. This time it's like a $1 million acquisition. And he lives in one side, rents the other 2 units out, and cash flows $1,500 a month of that. He gets tired of being a commercial banker at JP Morgan. I like kick him in the ass enough to go to business school. He gets into HBS. He rents now as a duplex, and he makes $5,000 a month off that. So this dude is making $8,000 a month from doing nothing other than breathing and like managing a property. So like that's pretty cool. This is my example. I would say this is what not to do. I mean, it worked out, but so I was graduating from here I was an investment banker. I had lived on base the entire time I was in the Marine Corps. And my wife was in the Navy. And I wanted a steam room really bad, right? So I was like, I'm gonna get this damn steam room. So I'm like, hey, what is the maximum that I'm approved for? 2.8 million? Sick. I want a $2.7 million house. Like, finances be gone. And so we buy this thing, we go into contract in March of 22, and we close in June of 22. And if you're doing math, you're like, wait a second, that's a really long closing. I thought you said like 30 days or 20. So the person we bought this from was a school teacher, which we could talk about like how crazy that is. The school teacher has a $2.7 million house. But anyway, it's a school teacher, right? So she couldn't close until she was finished teaching. Well, the other people trying to buy this house all wanted her out now. And I was like, I don't actually care. I don't start my job till July. So like, yeah, actually, that would be great for me. So because I was willing to listen, right, like who's taking negotiations? First rule of negotiation, figure out what the other side needs, right? So like she needed extended closing. I needed a house with a steam room. So it worked, right? Well, 6 months into investment banking, I wanted to jump out of the window and I was like, I gotta get out of this thing. So I turned it into a rental property. Thank God, the market is very strong. So we started renting it initially for $16,000. 8 months later, we bumped it up to $17,000. So I'm returning a 6.25% cap rate. It cash flows $2,000 a month. And my 4-year ROI, literally from just breathing, is gonna be 50% over my sunk cost. It's a pretty good investment. And if we leave, when my wife finishes CBS, if we decide to sell it, we'll walk away with $450,000 of profit. Again, from just breathing, like doing nothing other than like changing an air filter every couple of months. So that brings me to the calculation of what I wanted to show you, which was like rent versus own. So buying a property, so number one, you have to believe in real estate. Like I can tell you all this stuff, and that's all great, and you might think I'm an idiot, but real estate moves a little slower than the stock market, right? Like just think about how many actors are in the stock market. Like how many people are using Robinhood, how many people are robo-trading, whatever, right? You're competing against them. In the housing market, you're not. You're competing against another human. You have a human element that you're able to beat, right? Like we all studied like Art of War and all that hokey shit, but you actually have the ability to figure out what the other side needs and be able to beat that. You can't do that in the stock market. The other thing that you have is the ability to buy a house from 0% down. So like I showed you my example, my actual cost to acquire this house was like $51,000. And actually the majority of that was the funding fee, which I was later refunded. So let's say that you're not a veteran, right? And you buy a, let's say you buy easy math, you buy a $500,000 house and you have to place 20% down. So $100,000. Now let's just assume that that house appreciates at CPI. Let's call that 3.5%. So it's appreciating at roughly $15,000 a year. So you're making 15 grand on a $100,000 investment. So that's a pretty outsized return in comparison to the market. The next thing is if you throw a renter in that property, they're paying, and like, you know, you do your job well, they're paying at or above your mortgage payment. So they're paying off your principal, paying off your interest, taxes, and insurance. So anything above interest, taxes, and insurance is taxable income. So you're like even further in the green. So that's why you hear like you can make some serious dough on rental properties because like you're really just arbitraging the difference between your down payment and what the house is actually earning. And then it even gets furthered if you're a vet and you're doing 0% down with no funding fee, right? And then you look at a multifamily or whatever you're doing, you can start to make some pretty serious returns like I did just from kind of being lucky. I didn't like walk into this thing blind. I felt very comfortable buying this house even though I knew there was going to be kind of like locking me in golden handcuff style because the house next door had been long-term rented for $14,000. So I knew if all failed, I was going to come out of pocket like $1,000 a month. Not a big deal. And that's still cash flow positive from a taxable standpoint because my actual cost basis was like 10 grand. So when I was looking, I was like, I can live in a house in Greenwich. I have 2 kids. I can live in a house in Greenwich with my 2 kids, and my wife can have this great big house and all this stuff, and I can commute 45 minutes on a train, or I can spend $10,000 a month on a rental in New York and sit next to a homeless guy who peed on himself. Like, probably take the house in Greenwich. All right, cool. Now we're gonna do this case study. There's also like a Q&A in there. So if you haven't done that yet, I'll go through and answer some questions while we got this going. All right, so we have second Yela. Whose question is that? Not to put you on the spot, I just want to know what you want to know about it.
You just talked through, I think that's fine. You just talked through the, like how that affects your entitlement?
Yes. So let's take, for example, that you have, so the top entitlement in the United States is basically 1.2 million. The bottom is 806,000. So let's just say for easy math, it's $1 million. So you have your, that's called your county, this sucks. So that's called your county loan limit. So that divided by 4 is your county entitlement. So 250,000. Then your previous home, let's say you paid $600,000 for it. So you were charged how much? If you purchased for 600, you're charged 25%, 150,000. So your entitlement charged was 150,000 previously. So then the remaining, so your entitlement remaining is $100,000. So that means that you can spend $400,000 before having to place a down payment. So your max zero down is $400,000. And then anything above that requires a 25% down payment. So if you buy a $1.4 million house, you'll pay $250,000 in down payment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. And in the calculator I send out, it does that for you. So you don't have to remember this stuff. Is this the most competitive loan? So that is why I started doing this job. I can't speak for all lenders. I can tell you that, so does anyone know Chloe Ale, second year? So Chloe and Jeff just got into contract yesterday on their third offer they placed on a house in Texas in a very competitive market. They went out over other offers, other cash offers, all this stuff. Why? Because I would like to think that their realtor partner, number one, so Veterans Alliance, we've built out this thing to find realtors who are worth their salt. It wouldn't surprise you that it's pretty low bar of entry to get into real estate, right? Like most mortgage people and realtors were like selling Toyota Corollas 6 weeks ago. So number one, Chloe and Jeff had a badass realtor who knows what they're doing. So that's step one. Step number 2 is that as soon as we started putting in offers, I kept calling the sellers, right? And just explaining why. The sellers care about like a couple things. Is the person that's putting in the offer actually pre-approved, right? Like do they actually have the ability to get the loan? Is the lender behind them solvent and can they deliver funds on the day of closing? And then is the person talking to the phone completely full of it? And as long as those are like yes, yes, and no, then more than likely they're going to do it. So on the competitive loan front, I'd like to think we're pretty competitive. I've won deals in the most competitive markets in the United States, I would like to think. LA, SF, Austin, Nashville, Greenwich. I'm also a real estate broker in Greenwich. I won a house just now for my Naval Academy teammate, graduated from HBS. Multiple bid situation, all cash offers right behind us, all this stuff. And what we did was just figure out who the hell the seller was. So come to find out, the seller is an Army veteran who's the chief of police in Greenwich, who passed away, and his son is selling the house. So what better legacy for his dad's house than a Navy submariner who's going to move to Greenwich and start his family's life, right? Which your realtor can't say that, but there's no reason that I as the lender can. Like, there's no legal basis that I can't say that stuff, right? So like, you ingratiate yourself, you make yourself out to be a human. There's no one that's going to say, like, I don't want this vet to get this house. And if they do, then they're assholes. There's nothing that you can do. Interest rates as compared to market, no down payment makes mortgage payment too high, combining VA loan with another to buy a more expensive property. Let's take that in 3 strides. So interest rates as compared to market. So I could look it up, but the current conventional loan rate is probably, I don't know, 7.25%. And the average VA loan right now is like 6.7. So you're instantly lower because you have, and just think, like, the mechanics of why are always really interesting to me. Just think that I as the lender am getting a net positive benefit because there's someone else guaranteeing 25%. I'm getting to lend 100% loan to value to you. So I'm making more money on the loan, so therefore I don't have to charge as much interest. Win-win, right? And then the benefit for you is that no down payment. And while I'm on that, people always ask, like, oh, should I make a down payment? It's totally up to you. It makes 0 difference to me. I can tell you that my opinion, but again, like, I'm a believer in both the stock market and the real estate market. The 50 years, since 1950, the average S&P return is 10%. So if you can get money less than 10%, you should take it, right? Like, time value money wise. And so if you buy an $800,000 house, and instead of placing $200,000 down, you put $200,000 in the market, you return $20,000 a year, right? Well, then you can supplement your mortgage payment with that, or do whatever you want with it. But at least it gives you the optionality of, like, what do I want to do with the money, instead of putting it into a very slow-moving asset. Going back to that example of, like, there's just not that many players in the market, barring, like, Greenwich, Connecticut, or, I don't know, Austin. Some places take, like, a while to turn over a house. Well, if you need cash today, what are you going to do? Sell your house? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Keep the money somewhere else. Like, you don't, just as a piece of advice of someone that's 3 years away from you, and this is not me, like, preaching, like, you don't know if you're going to like your job. Like, I thought, just like I thought I was going to be the next combat in the Marine Corps, like, I thought I was going to be a fucking investment banker for the rest of my life. And I knew, like, literally within the first week, I was like, no, this is not it, right? You'll find your way. Like, I promise it, Wharton works out, especially if you're on VRD, to where it's like, cool, I found a job I actually enjoy, this is great and all that. But, like, it might not be what you do right out of school. So for me, I bought that big house. It worked out. But thank God I didn't put any money down, because I wasn't, I left banking. It's a longer story than this, but my last day as a banker was the day after my retirement portfolio vested. It was June 22nd, 2023. It's my last paycheck. This business did not become profitable until May of 2024. So I've got 2 kids. I've got a decently big mortgage. My wife's back in school, right? Like, if you're adding up the math, I burned through a lot to leave investment banking, but I was miserable. Don't ever do something because you hate it. Like, please, it's just not worth it. Like, I made $450,000 as a banker. It's not worth it. It's just not. So don't lock your money into an asset that you can't get out of. No down payment makes the mortgage payment too high. I think I covered that. You can supplement this. Another way to do it is with the buy down. You would never create a buy down yourself. You would do that externally using the market. But if the seller is willing to pay for it for you, the way that would look is, so right now I'm helping a Navy 13 grad who's a Marine with me. He bought a $700,000 house, and it was a new build, and the builder offered him $35,000 of seller concession. So if you do some quick math, you're like, wait a second, well, that's 5% of concessions. Why would the seller ever do that? And what it might look like is that the seller is a good dude, right? But actually what the seller is doing to an uninformed borrower or buyer is they're incentivizing you to purchase this house at an elevated purchase price, and then your closing costs are not going to be 35 grand. So if you don't know how to pull these levers of assigning it to debt or doing a buy down or doing whatever you want to do with it, all that money that you don't use in closing costs, so his actual closing costs are like $10,000. Tax prepaids, homeowner's insurance prepaids, transfer taxes. Normally all the rest would go back to the seller. So the seller ends up netting more. But what we did was do a 2-1 buy down, pay off some debt, organize the loan a little differently, stuff like that. What we did not do was pay points. Kind of like going around a bunch of circles here, but when you get a loan, you have the ability to pay points. So they're called discount points or discount fee or stuff like that. What you're actually doing is incentivizing the investor to put you in a different rate bracket. So I'd love to actually like show you what the mortgage market looks like. It's not this like big scary thing. Basically, we send out a loan, and think of it like Uber. Send out a loan, a bunch of people bid on it, and they say, hey, $700,000 house in Tampa, Florida, sweet. I want that at 6.75%. Another guy comes in, I want that at 6.875%, but I'll give him $2,000 of credit. Another guy, I'll give it to him at 6.5%, but I want him to pay a half a point in discount. So you, like me, my job is to look at that and say, does it make sense to pay $3,500 to save $78 a month? No. Why? Because the break-even period of that is 50 months. So do you believe that in 50 months, over 4 years, that we're going to be in the same rate environment? No. And your cost to refinance as a disabled veteran is next to nothing. It's your state title fees, which in Florida are like $3 grand. So save your $3 grand, put it in the market, earn 10% a year, and then do your refinance for free at the end. In the buy down example that I gave, a buy down conveys with title. So it's not money that you just threw out the door. It's money that you've allocated to go towards title. So if you sell your house, it pays off principal. If you refinance your house, it pays off refinancing cost. It's the only way to take money out of the deal. All right, combining VA loan with another's buy more expensive property. I don't understand the question.
So this was part of my question, but as you said at the beginning of the class, like there's no limit to the VA home loan, which is news to me. I thought there was like
You came last year.
No, I didn't come last
year.
year.
You didn't come last year?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Thought you came last year. My bad.
Yeah, very good.
The only time you would combine the VA loan is if you're doing an assumption. Does everyone know what an assumption is? Does anyone remember Rasan Johnson from last year? Our classmate. Rasan was my roommate at Neal Academy. He's a 2024 Wharton grad. So Rasan is selling his house in Arlington, Virginia for, you wouldn't mind me telling the story, for $1.1 million. He has a VA loan outstanding at 4.375% with a $937,000 balance. There is a veteran that's assuming the loan. The short of this is don't ever let someone assume your VA loan unless they are another veteran. If you let a civilian assume your VA loan, you will never get your VA loan back again. And if they screw something up, they don't pay it, the insurance gets kicked in, you are left holding the bag. So don't ever do that. Rasan is allowing 2 Army veterans, cautious, 2 Army veterans to assume his house, and they have to come up with $170,000 in cash to make up the delta between the two, right? Now, they have the cash to do it, so great. If they didn't have the cash, you can do a second line financing. So part of this is I've found some people that are willing to write second lines on mortgages, And that's how you could make an assumption on a bigger property. And all you would do is combine the rate of the two and decide if it's worth it compared to market rate. So in this example, the difference between 6.75% at a 1.1 purchase and 4.375% at $937,000 is $2,200 a month. So they're spending or placing $170,000 in cash to save $2,200 a month. So they're saving $24,000 a year and putting down what in present day value is $17,000 a year. So they're really saving $7,000 a year on this. So that's where like the math starts to come in of, does it make sense to not use 100% value? I can tell you personally, if the delta is only $22 a month and I'm placing $170,000 to do it, I'm personally going to take 100% financing and then spend that $170,000 in the market or do whatever I want with it, right? These people chose differently, but that's how that works. Qualifying without a paycheck for a conventional loan, VA entitlement tied up in 2 houses and won't be unwound until after purchase. Do you have any VA entitlement left, like $1?
Yeah, there's a little bit. It's not enough to use the loan, really, though.
Why?
Functionally. Because the 25% you mentioned, I'd end up having to pay
More than
most of the
conventional?
25% probably.
Got it. Yeah, there are conventionals down to 5%. So anything less on a conventional, anything less than 20% requires PMI. You would also be eligible for an FHA loan, depending on where it is. FHA loans have the same county loan limits as VA loans. You just can't go over that county loan limit. So it just depends on what you're doing. But qualifying for a conventional loan is basically the same as a VA loan. It's literally just the story that I tell of why you're able to make this payment. So it would be the same. You would just place somewhere between 5, and it doesn't make more sense, at least in my mind, does not make sense to place more than 20% down, but you can start, actually technically you can start at 0% down. We do have investors that do that, but it's more, it just depends. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sweet. All right, cool. So looks like we've got Houston, Virginia, Miami, Raleigh, and New York. Let's do Raleigh. Does that sound good? Sweet. Looks like most of us are interested in single family. Most of us are going to make between 200 and 225. Congrats, that's awesome. So we'll call that 212. I've never seen this happen. We have an even split. Let's go with 100%. Your spouses, so most of us are not married. As a married man of 8 years, smart. My wife's great. She's gonna kill me. She'll probably watch the recording, beat me in the night. And it looks like you're thinking about $750 to $999. All right, sweet. So now we go into this handy dandy calculator that I'll send out. And for all you future investment makers, you'll be able to create this one day. So you're making 212, 500. Your spouse is nothing. Your VA disability, we said, was 100%. So I don't remember what that is, but luckily I have a chart that does. So that's 38, 31, 30. You get to plus that up 25%. I didn't ask, but what if you're 100% VA disabled? You have no student loans. I don't know if you knew that or not, but congratulations, you won the lottery. You're moving to Raleigh, you have a car, or else you're riding a bike, and you have a Peloton because you're a millennial. So cool. So that builds out your net income. Then this comes down to like some area expertise. 1% and 0.35% is basically what I use across the country. In this, I give some like detail, right? You can see North Carolina is 0.82%, Texas is 1.68%. So you can like use this to compare places. if you're thinking about, should I take the job offer working for Moelis in Houston or Moelis in LA, you should go to California. That's the base case of that. This is property tax, yeah. But basically 1% at 0.35 is like a nice, comfortable thing. So then you come in here and you look at what the mortgage market has done in the past year. So generally it's been in the past year between 7 and 6%. And so you start to build out a sensitivity of what you can afford. So you can go down to 60% debt to income, 65% actually, so really down here. And so you see that you could be qualified somewhere between $1 million and 2.1 million. So we said 750 to 1 million, so we were on the low side of that. Do we want to stick with 750 to 1 million? So we're going to Raleigh. You could definitely get a pretty sweet spot for $1 million. So let's set that. Let's go like most people spend 30 to 45. And I told you like right now we're kind of in this range right here. So let's set our goal between 1 million and 1.5. Does that sound good? Sweet. So then this second section of this is your back end. So if you know that you don't want to spend more than $10,000 a month, these coordinate with what's up top. So if you say here, all right, well that coordinates with $1 million. So we know that we're going to set our budget between 1 million and 1.5. We're going to Raleigh. We want a house. We want a decently sized house. I like Zillow. So the top thing that I look for when I'm looking at real estate personally is high-end retail. So specifically I look for Whole Foods because if Amazon is choosing to be there, they're probably pretty good at figuring out why. I have a friend that looks at Bonobos, Core Power Yoga, Starbucks. There are a couple others, and he draws concentric circles around them, and where it all intersects, he's like, that's where I want to be. And it's worked for him. So I choose schools. Why do I choose schools? Because if you don't have kids, I'll clue you into something about people with children. We do crazy shit for our kids, like buy a $2.75 million house in Greenwich to send your kid to a 10 out of 10 public school. So if I'm looking for, I always want to have an exit plan, right? So if my exfil is to stick a renter in or sell it, well, if it's a renter, if that renter wants to put their kids in a really good public school, they're not going to care that I increase my rent 3.5% per year, right? Because they're getting something in return for it. And remember that pricing theory that if someone's buying something for someone they love, they like completely forget about rational thought. They're just like, oh yeah, whatever, I'll pay for it. The reason I like Whole Foods is if you pay $8 for an avocado, you're probably going to take good care of my house. So let's start looking. So, all right. These aren't rated. All right, zoom in some more, enhance. Does anyone know anything about Raleigh? My wife went to school here, I should know. So we start looking. That's a nice house. You don't want to tell me.
Which one are you looking at?
That's a pretty house. Let's check this out. All right, so you come in and you want to check to make sure there's no, if there's, HOAs are actually a great thing. Like my house is an HOA. It keeps people from parking old trucks in their front yard. So that's cool. You come down here, you read, right? You want to see if there's anything weird in the description. They'll sometimes like hide stuff in the bottom, like house won't qualify for conventional financing. You're like, what does that mean? It means it's probably on like a Superfund site or like something crazy, right? Like, so read the description, figure out if it's actually eligible for what you're trying to do, or if you even want the house. Other things you want to do, come down here, like just kind of generally read over, check if it's on public water, public sewer, like The VA doesn't care if it's on well or what's that stuff called? Septic, thank you. It doesn't care, but it's one extra test. So it's just another step in the process. So just something to be aware of. You can also find out your annual taxes amount, stuff like that. So we see annual taxes was $57.89. So we come back here, we're gonna put this in, $57.89. Kind of see where it goes. I mean, Zillow's a pretty great aggregate of information. If you're looking specifically in New York, then Street Easy is better because you can search by co-op or condo. I said you could buy a co-op with a VA loan. You can. I would, even if you're buying it all cash, I would not buy a co-op. And the reason is that co-ops have first right of refusal on literally if you're allowed to sell your property sometimes, which is crazy. So like literally the co-op can say like, you can't sell it or you can't rent it or whatever. What's up?
Is that the same as like a tenant in common? That's like a common thing in like San Francisco.
Yes, that's the same. They're synonymous. Yeah, so.
That shit seemed weird.
Yeah, I mean, I've had people buy co-ops. I'll tell the story. So a guy who graduated behind me at the Naval Academy, he went to, so he's really bright at the academy. He went to Oxford for his master's degree. He's like one of those dudes. Works on the White House presidential detail, becomes the youngest chief of staff at Google, works in AI at Google, becomes the youngest principal at Google, moves to New York with Google, tries to buy a co-op. So I'm doing his loan. We're like going through the stuff. And the co-op board tied him up for like 3 months and then literally just said like, oh, they can't sell this co-op. And that was the only reason. They were just like, yeah, we don't want the seller to sell. It's like, what the fuck? Like, why not? Like, this guy's super qualified. And he ended up buying a condo. It all worked out. Condos are just a little bit better because you own, in a co-op, the cooperative owns the building and you're kind of like a secondary lien to it. In a condo, you own that portion of the building. So like you're an owner of the condo association. So you have a little more say in what you can do. The only stipulation on the condos is that the VA has to approve the condo association, which is not a big thing. It's just not that bad. It takes like 2 weeks. But I would not buy a co-op, even if I wasn't using a VO. All right, cool. So 1195, Raleigh's pretty competitive. Let's say it's 1.2. So we have 1.2 million. I told you 6.75%. Monthly HOA was 0 on this. Insurance, 4,200. That's probably about right. That's your back-end DTI. You're going to get approved. If this is your profile, 212, 100% disabled, car and a Peloton, you're going to get approved 8 days a week at 40%. What this does is, let's say this was 225. What did I say our max was? Let's say this is let's just say it's 2 million. So you're at 64%. So that's, remember, your back end can go up to 65% before we have to do manual underwriting. And we have the conversation at the onset of, so when you get into contract, it's not some big secret. I basically just screen share with you and show you all the investors that are interested in your loan. We have 45 people we work with. They range from $10 billion publicly traded companies like United Wholesale Mortgage down to like literal mom and pop family offices. One's actually run by a former Marine, which he allows me to do some pretty cool stuff. So I'll screen share with you and I'll say, hey, this is what the rate market looks like today. Do you want to lock the loan today? Do you want to lock in this rate market, or do you want to float? And so if you think the market is falling, so like right now, I believe the market is falling from January 13th. Since inauguration day, it's been coming down. So like, that's nice. If you don't believe that, then you would say, well, I want to lock, right? And the cautious thing, especially if you're trying to do this, right? You're at 64%. The cautious thing would be to lock. You're never going to bottom tick a market. I don't care who you are. You're never going to bottom tick the market in 30 days. It just won't happen. Like in a normal closing period, you're not going to like tick the bottom of the market in the whole year. It's just not it. If you are a disabled vet, you have no funding fee, and you're using a VA loan, and I'm your lender, and I don't charge a fee for refinancing, then just get the house and then bottom tick the market over the next year and a half or 2 years or whatever when we watch and get an investor package in for like $100 million that's at 5.5%. Like we actually literally had that happen earlier this year where that $10 billion company is run by Matt Ishbia, who owns the Phoenix Suns. Well, we do so much VA that Matt was like, hey, here's $100 million. If you find me $100 million in loans, I will undercut any loan that is out there by 0.5%, and I'll pay their closing costs. So we're calling people, we're like, hey, do you want 0.5% off your loan for free? It's like, yeah, sure, why not? Like, it's pretty cool. So the cautious thing is like, okay, I'm at 64%. Let me get it. I'm gonna roll the dice. Like, let's see what happens. Well, let's say it comes back at 6.8. All right, cool, you're okay, right? Well, if the market shits and it goes to 66%, now you've just put yourself in manual underwriting mode, and which is not a bad thing, but it allows a human to have scrutiny over your entire profile. So they can look at everything and say whether or not you're eligible to buy this house. But hopefully it goes in this direction and it pumps down your DTI. So some other things in here are like a multifamily purchase scenario. So let's say that you bought, let's get back to this example. Let's say it's a $1 million place at 6.75, so $7,200 a month. So your purchase price, it's $1 million, 7,260. And then you think, so then it's like, let's say you found 4 of them, right? And you think that's going to rent for $6,000 a month. Well, cool. You're probably going to be able to buy like 3 of them before you cap out. If it rents for $8,000 a month, you could probably get all 4. If it's $8,500 a month, you're definitely get all 4.
Would you want to take into account vacancy rates, like historic vacancy rates in the area?
So you personally would, yes. So like this is just based on approval. This counts 75% occupancy. That's where they get that number from. You, when you're doing your due diligence, that's like I'll help you with that, but like that's where you have to really be invested and like figure out like Stanford, where I was thinking that triplex, dude, it's 45 minutes to New York City. It's like blowing up in Fairfield County. It's probably 100% occupancy. So like, and actually that particular building had 100% occupancy for 4 years. So like that's what I would use, right, for my personal numbers. But for this, they assume 25% vacancy. Then the other thing is this is the down payment required if you have an existing VA loan. So remember, you spend 100 or 600,000. Now you're going back to San Diego. So you can buy a $609,000 house, no down payment. And let's say you're buying a 125 house now, you're gonna bring $160,000 down. And then if it's a 1.3 house, 172, so on and so forth. Some other things that are in here, lots of people ask me like, what is residual income? If you want to see how that shakes out for you, you can use this. And then there's 2 examples built out. Other things in the slideshow, just like a case study resource. So I really like Zillow because it shows schools. Redfin, Realtor.com, those are all good. StreetEasy allows you to search the difference between condos and co-ops, specifically in New York City, which many of us are going to go be investment bankers, unfortunately. So you're able to use StreetEasy to do that. Tax Foundation is a really cool website because it aggregates county taxes. I won't bore you with it, but it shows a map across the US so you can actually like deep dive and do a ton of research. DTI calculation, make sure you're not going above, it's really at 65%, but anything above like 55 starts to get a little squirrely. And then residual income. And then the biggest thing, guys, is don't do this in a vacuum. I'm not some like real estate expert. I'm pretty good, but I see a shit ton of transactions across the country. So if you just want like an objective take of like, hey, Will, what do you think this house looks like?